Good morning, folks. Welcome back to the Philosophy for Philistines channel, otherwise known as Politics for Plebeians, on this July the 4th, when our American cousins are celebrating a revolution that wasn't really a revolution. Actually, what it was a restoration of the rule of law, because that's why they rebelled against the king. For the king had exceeded his legal and proper constitutional mandate to govern. And what they did was establish a nation under the rule of law, unlike any other revolution that has ever happened. The American Revolution is the only revolution that restored the rule of law by resurrecting the ancient rights of the English. Even prior to Magna Carta, the chieftains could not make arbitrary decisions in the proto-parliaments that existed within what is now the United Kingdom. The Anglo-Saxons called those parliaments Witten, while the Danes, Norwegians, and Swedes that immigrated there called their parliaments Ting, which means thing. And indeed, the parliament in Norway is called Storting, which means big thing. It's where the big matters are decided. And so, as I congratulate my American cousins and hope that you celebrate July 4th, I want to remind everybody, especially since this past weekend was our national holiday, properly called Dominion Day, because the official name of this country is the Dominion of Canada. I want to remind everyone that in the Anglo-Sphere, there is a tradition and a history of liberty. And many times we have been forced to rebel against the government or demand that the king remember Magna Carta. The famous jurist Sir Edward Coke once told the king, "For Magna Carta is such a fellow as will have no sovereign." Most of my podcasts are created as a result of conversations that I've had with my wife very often while driving her to work. Thank God I have a wife who is like-minded, in that she too believes in limited constitutional government and the rule of law, and also sees value in looking into the past and discovering how culture has played a role in creating responsible government, the zeitgeist of a nation, as it were. What we are facing today is not a revolution attempting to resurrect what we have inherited. Jordan B. Peterson often speaks about the need to go into the belly of the whale and resurrect the father. He says these things because we have inherited a system which is dead. And by that I mean our institutions were given to us by our ancestors, and they are no longer alive. So it is our job to revivify them. I thank God that Pierre Poilievre is my member of parliament, because Pierre often speaks about the need to revivify our institutions and restore them to being responsible and accountable to the people. We have inherited limited constitutional government as a result of the long struggle within the Anglo-Sphere to create a government that would answer to the people. The executive branch of government, the legislative branch of government, and the judiciary must remain at arm's length from one another and must not interfere with one another. They are there, in fact, to limit the activities of one another. what we saw over this past weekend was Canada was the nation's capital on Dominion Day being turned into an example of a police state, with Trudeau's armed Stasi harassing people who are legitimately protesting their loss of liberty and freedom under the radical neo-Marxist Trudeau government. Here's why it is neo-Marxist. Marxists do not care for the truth. Why? Because they only care about things that propagate the revolution. So all truth must be made subject to the cause of the revolution. And the revolution in a Marxist state is never over. Utopia, which literally means no place, is always some future goal that they seek to attain. There's never utopia in the present for the neo-Marxist. Why? Because the revolution is never over. The theories of Marx and Engels have invariably resulted in tyranny, murder, and oppression. And we see this now occurring on a global scale with the World Economic Forum and other international bodies that are deep in bed with multinational conglomerates that are forcing a complete materialistic revolution. And by materialistic, I mean, to them, all problems are associated with a lack of resources. And all problems are solved by redistributing limited resources. They fail to recognize that we are ontological creatures, and by that I mean that we have a divine purpose, and that human beings have to find a higher divine meaning to their life. That's number one in this part of my discussion, that we need to find meaning. Secondly, the resources and means of production are not as limited as the left constantly claims. I've been fortunate, blessed indeed, to have men, mostly men in my life, who are entrepreneurs. My best friend owns a firm in Niagara, and another dear friend owns a kitchen cabinet firm out on the West Coast. All successful. They can't service all the customers they have. And neither do they wish to, because it just too much is on their plate. But of all the guys I know that are successful entrepreneurs, know personally, that is, my brother-in-law, Stein Vola, he outstrips all of them. If people complain to him about the pie being finite and there not being enough slices to go around and that you have to keep dividing the pie into smaller and smaller pieces, Stein just says, no, I'm going to bake a larger pie. And no matter what it is, he finds new and inventive ways to increase the size of the pie, employ people, create wealth, and create meaning. Because all of these things happen only under the circumstances where you're servicing the customer. Free market individual economic liberty outshines controlled markets every day of the week, because you have billions of brains making choices about what to buy and where to buy it from. where to source it from. The entire lie being foisted on us by the radical left in the name of equity is the belief that everything is finite and that only the government is capable of redistributing finite resources. They don't care that their lies are causing, well, right now, a global food shortage. Right now there's a huge tractor protest in Holland because their government is complaining there's too much nitrogen in the soil. And the cost of producing food is going through the roof because of the government controlling the farmers' access to the resources they need to create crops, to grow crops. There's only two ways which nitrogen can be fixated because it's a large part of our atmosphere. Through the nodes on the roots and legumes is a natural way of fixating nitrogen, and the other natural way of fixating nitrogen is lightning. Nitrogen is the food that creates the food we eat. Without fixated nitrogen in the soil, we can't grow crops. So governments are literally waging war on the very mechanism by which we can feed ourselves, all in the name of the revolution. I invite you to look up how many people died in the Ukraine under the Soviet regime because of the policies of the communists giving these Soviet farms over to people that weren't capable of running them and murdering and throwing the people that were successful farmers in jail. Millions upon millions of Ukrainians starved to death. They were reduced to cannibalism. We must, at all costs, restore limited constitutional government. What happened in Ottawa this past weekend on Parliament Hill was a travesty. What they did to that soldier who marched across Canada, what they did to the people supporting him, what they did to the freedom protesters is unconscionable. We need to resurrect the dead father and restore limited constitutional government to Canada. And on that note, I'd just like to remind you that there are 10 types of people in relationship to understanding binary sexuality. That would be those who do understand it and those who don't. Those are the 10 kinds. Please understand that leftism is a parasitical mind worm that denies the nature of reality and denies the nature of the fact that God has provided us with a world that can give us everything we need as long as we don't deconstruct reality around us and deny the very nature of God. God bless you. Those are things to think and pray about. You have a lovely July 4th and celebrate the only revolution on earth that restored the rule of law.